The bright yellow moving truck pulled away from the curb as I wiped sweat from my brow. After 15 years in a downtown condo, I had finally achieved my dream, a charming colonial in the prestigious Oakwood Estates neighborhood. The sweeping oak trees, manicured lawns, and quiet streets were exactly what I needed after years of battling courtroom adversaries and navigating the cutthroat world of corporate law. My name is Jessica Reynolds, 38, and I had just made partner at Donovan, Keller and Associates, one of the most respected law firms in the city. This house represented more than just a change of scenery. It was my reward, my sanctuary, and the place I planned to finally find some peace. But Oakwood Estates had a reputation that extended beyond its picturesque appearance. The Homeowners Association was notorious for its strict adherence to rules, regulations, and an almost fanatical dedication to property values. I'd review the HOA covenant before purchasing, occupational hazard of being an attorney, and found it reasonable, if a bit extensive. The first 3 weeks were bliss. Neighbors brought welcome baskets, invited me to community events, and seemed genuinely pleased to have a new face in the neighborhood. Then came the driveway project. My house had a cracked, aging concrete driveway that desperately needed replacing. Rather than simply pouring new concrete, I opted for permeable pavers, an environmentally friendly option that allowed rainwater to seep through rather than contributing to runoff issues. They were attractive, functional, and actually more expensive than traditional options. I filed the proper paperwork with the HOA, received approval from the architectural committee, and scheduled the installation. The crew arrived on a Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon, I had a beautiful new driveway. It wasn't until Thursday that I first encountered Vivian Thornhill. I was retrieving my mail when I noticed a woman standing at the edge of my property, hands on her hips, frowning at my new driveway. She was in her early 50s, with meticulously highlighted blonde hair cut in a precise bob, wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the local grocery store logo embroidered on the chest. "Can I help you?" I called, trying to keep my tone friendly. She marched toward me with surprising determination. "You must be the new owner." "I'm Vivian Thornhill, Neighborhood Beautification Committee." I extended my hand. "Jessica Reynolds. Nice to meet you." She ignored my hand. "I don't recall the committee approving this unconventional driveway design." "Oh, I have all the paperwork," I said, maintaining my smile. "The architectural committee signed off last month. Would you like to see the approval?" Vivian's eyes narrowed. The beautification committee should have been consulted. "Those pavers don't match any other driveway in Oakwood Estates. They're eco-friendly," I explained. "They reduce water runoff and are actually better for the environment than traditional concrete. We have standards in this neighborhood, Ms. Reynolds. Uniformity is key to maintaining property values." With that, she spun on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing by my mailbox, bewildered by the interaction. The next morning, I found a printed sheet of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. "Notice of potential covenant violation." The heading blared in bold letters. Below was a grainy photo of my driveway with a paragraph citing Section 8.3 of the HOA covenant regarding harmonious neighborhood aesthetic standards. It was signed Vivian Thornhill, NBC Chair. I folded the notice and tucked it into my briefcase. At work, I pulled up the HOA documentation I had saved and confirmed what I already knew. The Neighborhood Beautification Committee was an advisory body only, with no enforcement authority. My driveway had been approved by the actual architectural committee, which did have authority. Days passed, and I received 3 more notices, each more strongly worded than the last. Rather than engage, I filed them away. My legal training had taught me the value of documentation. 2 weeks after the driveway installation, I decided to host a small dinner party to thank the neighbors who had been so welcoming. I invited couples from both adjacent houses and across the street. The evening was going wonderfully, wine flowing, conversation buzzing, and my signature paella receiving rave reviews when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Vivian standing next to an older gentleman in a golf shirt and press slacks. He had silver hair and the deep tan of someone who spent considerable time on the golf course. "Ms. Reynolds," Vivian said with a tight smile. "This is Theodore Walsh, president of the Oakwood Estates HOA board. We need to discuss your driveway situation immediately." Theodore looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we've caught you at a bad time," he began. "I have guests," I confirmed, gesturing to the dinner party visible behind me. "This won't take long," Vivian insisted, attempting to step forward. I held my ground in the doorway. Mr. Walsh, I'll be happy to schedule a meeting with you during regular business hours. You can email me to arrange a time. Theodore nodded. That seems reasonable. Oh, this is exactly the kind of dismissive attitude that undermines community standards. Vivian interrupted. If we allow one unapproved modification, soon the entire neighborhood will look like a hodgepodge of individual tastes rather than a cohesive, valuable community we've built. My neighbor Devin, who lived across the street, appeared behind me. Everything okay, Jessica? Just a small misunderstanding about my driveway, I explained. Devin peered past me. Oh, hey, Ted. Didn't know you were joining the party. The paella is amazing. You should come try some. Theodore looked increasingly uncomfortable. Another time, perhaps. Sorry to interrupt your evening, Jessica. We can discuss this later. As they turned to leave, I heard Vivian hissing. She has the entire board wrapped around her finger already. Don't you see what's happening? The next day, I was at the local grocery store when I rounded the corner with my cart and came face to face with Vivian behind the checkout counter. Her name tag identified her as Vivian T. Assistant Manager. Her expression soured immediately. I hope you're planning to address that driveway situation promptly. I placed my items on the conveyor belt. There's actually no situation to address. The Architectural Committee approved my plans, which is the only approval required under Section 5.2 of the Covenant. Vivian's fingers tightened around a bunch of celery as she scanned it. The Beautification Committee has jurisdiction over aesthetic harmony. Actually, the committee you chair is advisory only, with no enforcement authority, I corrected gently. But I appreciate your dedication to the neighborhood. A flush crept up Vivian's neck as she aggressively bagged my groceries. You newcomers always think you can just waltz in and change things. People like you are why property values suffer. Interesting theory, I replied, swiping my credit card. Though housing prices in Oakwood have increased 12% year over year, outpacing the rest of the city, that'll be $78.42, she snapped, ignoring my comment. As I wheeled my cart away, I overheard her telling the next customer, "That's the woman I was telling you about, the one destroying neighborhood standards with her bizarre driveway." Over the next week, I noticed Vivian's silver Lexus SUV driving slowly past my house at least twice daily. Sometimes she would stop completely, taking photos with her phone. One evening, I returned home to find small paper tags attached to 3 ornamental grasses I'd planted along the edge of the driveway. Each tag read, "Unapproved species." I was removing the tags when my neighbor Lucia from next door wandered over. "I see you've been Vivian," she said with a sympathetic smile. "Is this a regular occurrence?" I asked. Lucia nodded. Vivian has appointed herself neighborhood enforcer. Last summer, she measured everyone's grass with a ruler and left citations for any lawn exceeding 3.5 inches. The actual HOA rule is 4 inches. Why does everyone tolerate this? Most people just comply to avoid the hassle. Vivian's persistent. That was putting it mildly. Over the next few days, I received a certified letter claiming my driveway pavers were non-standard materials, despite their official approval. I found flyers on several neighbors' doors warning about recent property modifications threatening community values. And most alarmingly, I caught Vivian inside my property line one evening, using a measuring tape on my driveway while muttering into her phone. When she saw me, she straightened up without a hint of embarrassment. "Documentation for the covenant violation," she explained, as if it were perfectly normal to trespass. "Vivian," I said calmly, "you're currently trespassing on private property. I've asked you repeatedly to stop harassing me about a driveway that has full HOA approval." She waved a dismissive hand. The approval was clearly obtained under false pretenses. No one would approve these pavers if they understood the impact. "I need you to leave my property now." "Or what?" she challenged, crossing her arms. "Or I'll be forced to take appropriate measures," I replied evenly. She scoffed. "Is that a threat? I'm protecting this community from people who don't respect our standards." "It's not a threat. It's a statement of fact. Please leave." She finally stalked off, but not before taking a few more photos of my driveway from the sidewalk. That night, I documented the encounter in a journal I'd been keeping of all interactions with Vivian. As an attorney, I knew the value of contemporaneous records. I also installed a discreet security camera overlooking my front yard and driveway, a precaution that would prove more valuable than I could have imagined. The situation was about to escalate dramatically, but neither Vivian nor I realized just how consequential our next encounter would be. The next few weeks brought an escalation I couldn't have anticipated. What began as an annoying neighborhood dispute was rapidly evolving into something far more concerning. Every morning as I left for work, I noticed Vivian's Lexus parked 3 houses down, her figure barely visible behind the steering wheel as she monitored my comings and goings. My security camera captured her approaching my front door at least 4 times while I was at work, leaving increasingly aggressive notices about my driveway, my newly planted ornamental grasses, and even the color of my mailbox, which was a standard black, identical to a dozen others on the street. I was reviewing a contract in my office when my phone buzzed with a text from Lucia, my next-door neighbor. Check your email. Emergency HOA newsletter just went out. I pulled up my inbox to find a message with the subject line urgent, property value alert. The body contained a poorly formatted newsletter with the headline Covenant Violations Threatening Oakwood Standards. Below was a grainy photo of my driveway alongside text warning about unapproved modifications undermining neighborhood aesthetic cohesion. It urged residents to report any similar violations to the Neighborhood Beautification Committee, Vivian's committee. I forwarded the email to Theodore Walsh, the HOA president, with a brief note. Theodore, I'm concerned about this unauthorized communication using official HOA channels. My driveway was approved through proper channels, as I documented repeatedly. This appears to be a personal vendetta rather than legitimate HOA business. Theodore called me within the hour, clearly flustered. Jessica, I had no idea Vivian sent this out. She shouldn't have access to the email system. I'll handle this immediately. I appreciate that, I said, but this is becoming harassment. I've documented over a dozen incidents in the past 3 weeks. Vivian can be overzealous, he admitted, but she's been part of the community for 15 years. She genuinely believes she's protecting property values. By stalking new residents and distributing false information, he sighed heavily. I'll speak with her. This won't happen again. But Theodore's intervention only seemed to fuel Vivian's determination. 2 days later, I arrived home to find a notice from the City Code Enforcement Department taped to my door. Someone had reported my driveway as a potential code violation for improper drainage. The inspector had already visited and cleared the installation, noting that the permeable pavers actually exceeded code requirements for drainage. The following day, another complaint, improper construction without permits. Again, the inspector verified that all proper permits had been pulled and approved. Then came complaints about non-native plant species. My ornamental grasses were on the city's recommended water conservation list. Improper setback from the property line. My driveway was actually 6 inches further from the line than required, and even a noise complaint about construction that had been completed over a month earlier. Each complaint was investigated and dismissed, but the pattern was clear. I pulled up the security camera footage from the days before each complaint was filed. Every single time, Vivian had been photographing my property hours before the complaint arrived. I decided it was time to understand exactly what authority Vivian actually held within the HOA. During my lunch break, I called Amanda Diaz, the HOA's secretary and a real estate attorney I'd met at a bar association event years earlier. Amanda, it's Jessica Reynolds. I bought the Mitchell place on Oakwood Drive. I was hoping you could clarify something about the HOA committee structure for me. Of course. And welcome to the neighborhood. Meant to drop by with cookies, but court calendars have been brutal. What's up? The Neighborhood Beautification Committee. I'm trying to understand their actual role and authority. There was a pause. The what committee? Beautification Committee. Chaired by Vivian Thornhill. Amanda's laugh caught me off guard. Oh, that. Look, there's no official beautification committee in our HOA structure. Vivian created that title for herself about 5 years ago. She printed business cards and everything. The board just didn't have the heart to tell her to stop. So she has no actual authority within the HOA? None whatsoever. She's not even on the board. She volunteered to help with the community garden a few years back and somehow leveraged that into appointing herself neighborhood watchdog. Most people just humor her. I thanked Amanda and hung up, pieces finally clicking into place. Vivian wasn't enforcing rules, she was inventing them. The realization should have been comforting, but something about the intensity of her fixation on my property made me uneasy. That unease proved justified the following Tuesday. I was in court all day, representing a client in a complex contract dispute. My phone was off as I presented evidence, cross-examined witnesses, and delivered my closing argument. It was nearly 6 p.m. when I finally checked my messages. 17 missed calls. 5 from Lucia, 3 from Devin across the street, 2 from Theodore Walsh, and 7 from numbers I didn't recognize. I had 23 text messages, all variations of "call me ASAP" and "what's happening at your house?" My stomach dropped as I dialed Lucia's number. "Jessica." Finally. "Are you okay?" Lucia sounded frantic. "I'm fine, just getting out of court." "What's going on?" "There are 3 police cars in front of your house right now. They've been there for almost 2 hours." I nearly dropped my phone. "Police? Why?" Vivian called 911 claiming someone was destroying property in the neighborhood. She told them someone was tearing up your driveway without permits and causing a public hazard. My mind raced. But there's no one at my house. I haven't scheduled any work. I know. I told the officers that, but they said they had to investigate a reported crime in progress. They've been talking to neighbors, taking photos. Vivian's been standing across the street the whole time, directing them around your property. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already gathering my files. The scene that greeted me was surreal. 2 police cruisers were parked in front of my house, light bars silently flashing. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered at a respectful distance. And there, standing next to one of the officers, was Vivian, pointing animatedly at my driveway. I parked on the street and approached calmly, briefcase in hand, still wearing my court attire. "Excuse me." I called to the nearest officer, a woman in her early 40s with lieutenant bars on her collar. "I'm Jessica Reynolds. This is my home. Can you tell me what's happening?" The officer, her nameplate read Rivera, turned with a look of relief. "Ms. Reynolds, thank you for coming. We received a 911 call reporting destruction of property at this address. As you can see, there's no destruction happening." I gestured to my perfectly intact house and driveway. "Who made this report?" Lieutenant Rivera's expression turned professional. "We're required to investigate all emergency calls. The caller reported someone tearing up the driveway without proper authorization, creating a safety hazard and potential code violations." From across the lawn, Vivian's voice rang out. "That's her. That's the homeowner who authorized the illegal modifications." I took a deep breath, maintaining my courtroom composure. "Lieutenant, may I show you something?" I retrieved a folder from my briefcase and handed her several documents. The HOA approval for my driveway, the city permits, the final inspection certificate, and the property deed with my name clearly listed. My driveway renovation was completed over a month ago with all proper approvals and permits. As you can see, everything is in order. Lieutenant Rivera reviewed the documents carefully while Vivian stormed over. "Those approvals were obtained fraudulently," she insisted. "The materials used aren't approved for this neighborhood. I've documented multiple covenant violations." Lieutenant Rivera looked between us. "Ma'am, these permits appear to be in order. There's no construction or destruction happening on this property. Check the property line setbacks." Vivian demanded. "Measure the driveway width. The covenant clearly states." "Ms. Thornhill," Lieutenant Rivera cut in firmly, "is there an active emergency happening right now that requires police presence?" Vivian faltered. "Well, no, but did you witness anyone destroying property today as you reported in your 911 call?" "I saw her landscapers moving around the driveway area earlier, and I know she doesn't have approval for her." Lieutenant Rivera held up a hand. "Ms. Thornhill, did you call 911 to report a crime that wasn't actually occurring?" The gathered neighbors had fallen silent, watching the exchange. "I was reporting a covenant violation." Vivian insisted, her voice rising. "She's destroying neighborhood property values with that monstrosity of a driveway. HOA covenant disputes are civil matters, not criminal emergencies," Lieutenant Rivera stated firmly. "Calling 911 for non-emergency situations like this diverts resources from actual emergencies and is potentially a misuse of emergency services." "But she..." "Ms. Thornhill," I interjected calmly, years of courtroom experience steadying my voice despite my anger. "I should inform you that I've documented every interaction we've had since I moved in. I have security camera footage of you trespassing on my property multiple times. I have copies of the false complaints you filed with various authorities. And now you've misused emergency services to continue your campaign of harassment." Vivian's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Are you threatening me?" I'm stating facts, I replied. And I should also mention that I'm a partner at Donovan, Keller, and Associates, specializing in property law and civil litigation. The impact was immediate. Vivian's mouth opened and closed without sound. Several neighbors gasped. Lieutenant Rivera's eyebrows rose slightly. You're a lawyer. Vivian finally managed, her voice suddenly much smaller. I am. And while I've been patient with your behavior up to this point, calling 911 to report a false emergency crosses a line that I cannot ignore. Lieutenant Rivera turned to the other officers. We're clear here. No emergency, no crime in progress. To Vivian, she added, Ms. Thornhill, I need to take a statement from you regarding the 911 call. As the officers led a protesting Vivian toward one of the cruisers, Theodore Walsh approached, looking deeply uncomfortable. Jessica, I can't begin to apologize enough for this situation. I had no idea Vivian would take things this far. This goes well beyond HOA matters now, Theodore, I replied. She's filed false reports with multiple government agencies and misused emergency services. That's not overzealous. That's potentially criminal. He nodded miserably. The board will address this immediately. Vivian's activities have been a point of concern before, but never to this degree. As the crowd began to disperse, Lucia approached with a sympathetic smile. Well, that was the most excitement Oakwood Estates has seen since the Great Garden Gnome controversy of 2018. Despite everything, I laughed. I'm afraid this isn't over yet. I watched as Lieutenant Rivera spoke sternly to Vivian, who had deflated considerably since my revelation. The look Vivian shot me as she was escorted to give her statement contained something new fear. She was right to be afraid. I wasn't just any homeowner she could intimidate with fake citations and false authority. I was an attorney who understood exactly how serious her actions had become. And I had documented everything. That evening, I spread my evidence across my dining table: photos, security footage, dated journal entries, copies of false complaints, testimony from neighbors, and now police reports. The case against Vivian Thornhill was substantial and growing. The question was no longer whether I would take action, but what form that action would take. As I organized the documents, my phone rang, an unknown number. Jessica Reynolds speaking. There was a pause, then a tentative voice. Ms. Reynolds, this is Officer Natalie Rivera. We spoke earlier. Yes, Lieutenant. What can I do for you? I wanted to inform you that we've completed our investigation of today's incident. Ms. Thornhill has been cited for misuse of emergency services. I appreciate the follow-up. There's something else, Lieutenant Rivera continued. This isn't the first time Ms. Thornhill has called in false reports. We have record of 7 similar incidents in the past year, all regarding supposed property violations that turned out to be unfounded. I sat up straighter. 7 other incidents. Yes, all following the same pattern, calling 911 for HOA or civil matters that weren't emergencies. Most were about new homeowners like yourself. That's concerning, I said, understating my reaction. I thought you should know, especially given your profession. The department takes misuse of emergency services very seriously. After thanking her and ending the call, I added this new information to my growing file. The picture it painted wasn't just of a busybody neighbor overstepping bounds. It showed a pattern of deliberate harassment targeting new residents who didn't conform to Vivian's personal vision for the neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring consequences Vivian Thornhill never anticipated when she decided to target my driveway. I just needed to decide exactly how extensive those consequences would be. I arrived at the HOA emergency meeting 15 minutes early, leather portfolio tucked under my arm containing everything I needed. The community center conference room was already half full. Word had spread quickly about the previous day's police incident. Theodore Walsh approached as I took a seat near the front. Jessica, thank you for coming. We've asked Vivian to attend as well. I expected as much, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. The room filled quickly. At precisely 7 p.m., Vivian entered, head high despite the whispers that followed her. She took a seat in the back row, pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. Theodore called the meeting to order. We're here to address recent events involving covenant enforcement and appropriate channels for addressing concerns. He outlined the previous day's incident without naming names, though everyone knew exactly who was involved. Before we continue, he concluded, Ms. Reynolds is asked to address the board. I approached the podium, placing my portfolio on the surface. Years of courtroom experience steadied my nerves as I surveyed the room. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. When I moved to Oakwood Estates, I was attracted by its reputation for community and quality of life. What I've experienced instead has been harassment, false accusations, and abuse of authority. I opened my portfolio and removed a stack of documents. I've compiled a record of interactions with Ms. Thornhill over the past month. I handed copies to each board member. This includes security footage of trespassing, copies of false citations, evidence of unauthorized use of HOA communication channels, and documentation of false reports to city agencies and emergency services. Murmurs rippled through the audience as board members flipped through the pages. As a litigation attorney, I could pursue legal action against both Ms. Thornhill and potentially the HOA for failing to address this harassment. However, I prefer to resolve this matter within our community. Theodore looked up from the document, face pale. What are you proposing? First, Ms. Thornhill must immediately cease all harassment and unauthorized enforcement activities. Second, the board must clarify to all residents that the Neighborhood Beautification Committee holds no enforcement authority. Third, the HOA needs to implement a formal process for addressing covenant concerns that doesn't involve midnight photography sessions and false police reports. From the back of the room, Vivian stood up. This is absurd. I've devoted 15 years to maintaining standards in this neighborhood, while the board has been negligent in enforcement. I turned to face her directly. Ms. Thornhill, you called 911 to report a crime that wasn't occurring. You filed false reports with city agencies. You trespassed on my property repeatedly. These aren't HOA issues, they're potentially criminal matters. I was protecting property values, she insisted. By breaking the law? Lieutenant Rivera, who had slipped into the meeting unnoticed, spoke up from her seat. Ms. Thornhill has been cited for misuse of emergency services. The district attorney is reviewing whether additional charges are warranted given the pattern of behavior. Vivian blanched. Pattern? What pattern? 7 similar incidents in the past year, I replied. All documented by police. The room erupted in conversation. Theodore banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, please. When the room quieted, I continued. I've prepared a cease and desist letter. I removed an envelope from my portfolio. Ms. Thornhill, this formally demands you stop all harassment, trespassing, and false reporting related to my property. Violation will result in immediate legal action. I approached and handed her the envelope. Her hand trembled as she took it. Additionally, I turned back to the board. I filed for restraining order preventing Ms. Thornhill from coming within 100 feet of my property or initiating contact with me. Theodore cleared his throat. The board will take immediate action. Ms. Thornhill is removed from all HOA committees, effective immediately. We'll issue a formal clarification about proper channels for covenant concerns. Vivian jumped to her feet. You can't do that. I've served this community faithfully while you've allowed standards to slip. Amanda Diaz, the HOA secretary, spoke up. Vivian, the committees you claim to chair don't officially exist. You created them yourself without board authorization. That's not true. Vivian protested. It is, Theodore confirmed. We appreciated your volunteer spirit, but you've overstepped boundaries repeatedly. This incident with Ms. Reynolds is simply the most extreme example. What happened next shocked everyone. Vivian burst into tears. I just wanted to keep our neighborhood beautiful, she sobbed. When my husband left 5 years ago, this community was all I had left. I just wanted to protect it. The room fell uncomfortably silent. I hadn't expected this vulnerability from my tormentor. Vivian, I said more gently, caring about your community is admirable. Harassing neighbors and filing false reports is not. There are constructive ways to contribute without intimidation. After the meeting adjourned, Theodore approached with the HOA treasurer, Philip Hargrove. Jessica, we've been discussing your driveway design. The permeable pavers actually address drainage issues we've had in several areas. Would you be open to sharing the contractor information? The board is considering recommending this solution for future driveway renovations. I smiled. Of course. I'd be happy to. As people filtered out, Lieutenant Rivera approached. Ms. Reynolds, just so you're aware, we conducted a property inspection at Ms. Thornhill's residence today. Oh. Ironically, her own driveway violates 3 separate HOA regulations. It exceeds maximum width by 18 inches, uses unapproved concrete finishing techniques, and encroaches on the setback requirement by nearly 2 feet. The irony was almost too perfect. 3 weeks later, life in Oakwood Estates had transformed. The board implemented clear procedures for covenant concerns. My restraining order against Vivian was granted. Most surprisingly, Vivian sold her house and moved to a neighboring city. Before she left, she delivered an envelope to my office, not my home, respecting the restraining order. Inside was a handwritten apology acknowledging her behavior and explaining, though not excusing, her actions. The loss of her marriage had left her grasping for control anywhere she could find it. The final twist came at the quarterly HOA meeting. Theodore unveiled new community guidelines for environmentally sustainable property improvements, featuring my permeable paver driveway as the recommended standard for future renovations. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Vivian sought to drive me out for being different, only to discover that different was exactly what the community needed. As for me, I finally found the peace I'd been seeking, though not without a legal battle I never anticipated winning in my own driveway.